All right.
Welcome, welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thank you for, if you could, again, a little bit of echo. We'll give folks a few minutes to trickle in. There we go. Perfect, perfect. Right on, right on. We'll give folks a couple minutes to trickle in. But for those who are joining on time, you are in for a super treat today. We have an amazing show here lined up for you today on ADOSCA Media and also broadcasting to Sacramento ADOS as well. If you take a look at your screen, you will see that we have none other than some of the most specialist, most awesomest Sacramento candidates and also community advocates and folks doing great work here in the Sacramento community. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a minute or so, but just by way of introduction, my name is Chris Lodson. I am here in Sacramento with Sacramento ADOS Sacramento specifically. I am one of the founding members of ADOS Sacramento. We, of course, focus on political education, specifically for Black Americans who descend from the institution of chattel slavery here in this country. We also focus very much on what we call the Black agenda, and of course, reparations, which is our cornerstone and a keystone policy objective at the federal level specifically. But as folks who are paying somewhat attention to what's been going on in California over the last several weeks, we were also very instrumental in the passage of AB 3121, which is the California Task Force to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans. This team here, along with a greater California team of about 7 or 8 different chapters, work very closely with Assemblywoman Dr. Shirley Weber to make sure that that bill passed and pushes forward and advances our key policy objective, of course, which is reparations. As folks trickle in, today's broadcast is specifically going to be focused on Sacramento. So Sacramento, we are specifically focusing today on local politics here in the state's capital. I'm going to also just very quickly introduce my co-hosts here who are not on screen right now, but are doing amazing work for us. We've got the good brother. There we go. All right, we've got you Moya on the ones and twos. We got Kim on the ones and twos. Also, Kim Moya, do you want to say hi?
Hello. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited and appreciative of your willingness to come out and speak with us today about these initiatives. We're trying to get the information out to our community, our ADOS voting block. So thank you for sharing your input.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. My Cassandra and Katie, and this is going to be a very informative and productive show. So thanks for coming.
Yes, and why don't we get right to it, Umoya? You said the names. Why don't we go right to the guests? I want to start with I'll start from my left and then go right. So that's with my. Why don't you introduce yourself? I'm sure many folks know who you are, but introduce yourself to the ADOS Sacramento audience and tell us why you're here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I hope all of y'all are staying healthy and safe. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, so I would rather us be in person, but given the situation, we have to do this virtually. And so I thank you so much for having me here today. Incredibly honored and blessed to be in space with all of you. And just a shout out to ADOS for giving me the opportunity to be here today to share my story and to be part of a conversation just really about civic engagement and the importance of us turning out, showing up to vote for our communities. I am Vang, born and raised in South Sacramento. I am a candidate running for Sacramento City Council District 8. And I know that we'll probably probably have questions later. The only thing I will say is that for once, I think that, there is so much active campaigning happening in District 8. The voters of District 8 deserves amazing, strong, bold, courageous candidates fighting for them. And so, win or lose in November, we got 22 days left to go. I think that this community is activated, excited about the candidates running, and really just honored to be here today. And we'll see what happens in November. But win or lose, I keep saying, I live in Meadowview. I'm going to keep fighting for our families and our communities. And so just really honored to be here today and to speak with all of you, and just to make sure we also turn out the vote, because there's so much at stake, not just at the local level, but also at the national level. So thank you so much, Chris, for having me, and just really grateful to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Much appreciated. Why don't we go to Cassandra Jennings? Hey.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to really talk and be a voice for the community. My name's Cassandra Jennings, and I've been in this community over 30 years. Right now, I am the president and CEO of the Greater Sacramento Urban League. And our mission is to work with underserved communities and African Americans to help them achieve economic self-reliance. And that not only comes from good jobs and starting businesses and being able to take care of their family, but also being empowered as a people to really represent themselves and be a voice in the community. And then also as it relates to education. So we do a lot around employment and education. We are a vote center this year, and we are going all out to get people educated, prepared for the vote, and to get them out. We take it very serious in every election, but this one is a consequential election, not only on the federal level, but the local level. And with all the pandemics, we say there are 3 of them now that we're going through. We want to make sure that people have an opportunity to voice themselves, not only filling out their census, and they still have to October 31st to do that, but also to vote. Because as the former First Lady says, we should vote like our life depends on it. And it does depend on it. So thank you for the opportunity today to really come and just share where we think we should be going, and how it's important that people weigh in on things that have a great sort of impact on their lives and their communities.
Thank you so much for that. One, you mentioned the census. Fam, please fill out your census, okay?
Yes.
Please fill out your census, okay? You got until October 31st. Please fill out your census. Thank you for raising that, Cassandra, and also thank you for your work. Let me go right to last, but certainly never least, Katie Valenzuela.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Katie Valenzuela. I was recently elected to the Sacramento City Council for District 4, which is Central City, a little bit of Natomas, Land Park, and Little Pocket. And I've been an organizer my entire life, including the last 11 years here in Sacramento, from building gardens to doing policy change at the Capitol for environmental justice and homemade food sales. And I've been really thrilled to be able to now focus on helping friends like mine win their race, because that's really important, and also working on the No on A and Yes on C campaigns, as that's under the banner of the Sacramento People's Campaign. So I'm excited to talk to you all a little bit more about that.
Yeah, super excited. We're gonna get with, and so actually it's a perfect segue. Want to talk to the family a little bit about the format, what they can expect, in terms of the dialogue and the conversation today. Also, I want to make mention. I would be remiss if I didn't make mention that Mai is in a competitive race right now for District 8 City Council. We did invite Mai's competitors, particularly Les Simmons, to the broadcast today. Just in full disclosure, Les's team says that they had a schedule conflict, so that they could not make it. So just in full disclosure, we are a political education focused group, so we make sure that we reach out to as many of the candidates as possible. Also, the man himself, Mr. Darrell Steinberg, was also invited today to talk specifically about Measure A and we didn't receive a response from the mayor's office that I remember. But Kim and Yamor, correct me if I am wrong. So just wanted to make mention of that. Also, in terms of format today, fam, we're going to start the conversation specifically with questions centered or targeted to both Mai and Katie, specifically about local city issues here, and then we're going to back the conversation out sometime in the next 20 minutes or so to include Cassandra to speak specifically about measures A and C, as well as get comments and commentary and feedback on measures A and C from Katie and Mai as well. So also, before we get started, please like, share, comment, ask your questions. If you have questions for anyone of the panel, anyone on the panel here today, we are super blessed to have them. We are super excited, as you can tell. I'm super excited, and I just sipped my first sip of coffee just now, even though I've been sipping tea for the past hour. So please ask your questions. This is, we're excited to do this because we do political education here in the city of Sacramento, and so this is a part of our job. We take our job seriously, and it's not just before elections. We do this work in between elections, where if you've been around the city of Sacramento over the last year, you've seen us at community events, booths and tables. You've probably seen me in front of light rail stations here or there also too. So this is our work. We take it seriously. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to give both Mai and Katie time to respond to it. Take as much time as you need to respond. The first question is actually for Mai. Can you talk to the audience, about why you feel you are the most qualified candidate for the office that you're running for?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris, for your question. So I will just, share with all of you, I was born and raised in South Sacramento. I am a proud daughter of Hmong refugees, grew up here, went through our school. I live in Meadowview, and I do believe I am the best candidate for District 8 because I am the only candidate with the governance experience, the policy experience, and the organizing experience to hit the ground day one. I know our neighborhoods. I know our neighborhood leaders. I know how City Hall operates. I'm also incredibly passionate about about this community. I'm ready to fight at City Hall tooth and nail to make sure that we get resources for our students, for our families, for our neighborhoods, for our communities that often are left behind. And that's why I'm running. I know earlier, I mentioned, I think for once, I think what's really awesome as a resident in District 8, as a voter in District 8, our community deserves strong candidates. We deserve a palette of strong candidates. And for once, like I was saying, District 8 is activated. I don't think there's been this many outreach in terms of canvassing pre-COVID, right? Outreach to constituents. The community is engaged in the political process. And that is a part that's actually really exciting for me as well. And so I'm just excited to be part of this process. This campaign, I will also say, it's not about my Vang as well. We are using our campaign as a vehicle to educate our community about key proposition like A and C and Prop 16. And so we're going all in. But I do believe I am the best candidate because I have that governance experience, the policy experience, and the organizing experience to serve this community that I love deeply.
Thank you for that, Mai. And Katie, I'm going to turn it to you now. You're in a slightly different position because you are incoming, as a councilwoman. So can you talk about just a slight modification on the question? Can you talk about why you think voters chose you as the most qualified candidate for this office? Why do you think you were chosen over your competitors?
Honestly, we had this vision of a Sacramento for all of us, that Sacramento is good when everybody in Sacramento and all the neighborhoods in Sacramento have what they need. And I think the reason voters chose me was because we're on this trajectory where we're really leaving people behind. A lot of changes happen in the central city. A lot of changes happen for certain businesses, for certain communities that hasn't been felt by everyone. Even here in the central city, as privileged as we are, there are pockets of folks here who have been completely left out of the decision making, who've been left out of the benefits. of what we've been doing. So we ran a people-powered campaign just like mine and got out the vote and really churned people out for this vision of doing it together. I ran on the platform of, I'm not going to come in and try to make the answers for you. I'm going to bring you with me, and we're going to do this together. And that people power and making people a part of governance is really what folks wanted more than anything, regardless if we disagree, if folks are more conservative and maybe we don't agree on the law enforcement stuff or the budget or what have you, but they did like the fact that they knew that they would always have access to me and that I was going to be bringing them with me when I got to City Hall.
Thank you for that answer. Moving right forward, question for the both of you. Mai, should you be elected, and Katie, as you move into office, what are your top two priorities? What are the top two priorities on your list? And Katie, I'm actually going to start with you for this one.
Yeah, we've been busy already getting started on this. And so since the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade, we really got mobilized, and I was really privileged to be able to start working with organizers in the community to create what's now called the People's Budget of Sacramento, which we modeled after what Black Lives Matter Los Angeles had done, where we wanted to bring people into the budgeting process. Because I think really moving upstream on this challenge, like we need to talk about accountability, we need to talk about use of force, we need to talk about oversight, but we also need to talk about, our budgets are the strongest reflection of our values, and we need money to be funding the types of things that make communities whole, that prevent the types of emergencies, that lead people to call law enforcement, so that we can really confront this issue as far upstream and with the least amount of harm as possible. And so that for me is the top priority, especially as we go into recover from COVID. It's going to be a tight budget next year, and we need to be organized so that we don't see cuts to youth programming, we don't see cuts to parks programming, we don't see cuts to the things that we need in order to recover from this and ensure our communities are going to be able to bounce out of this better than we were before the crisis.
Thank you for that. My top two priorities.
Yeah, so I would say definitely a public health response to what's happening and equitable investment, right? As COVID-19 and racial inequities continue to impact our city, I think, Chris, all of us know that it's our most vulnerable communities, our Black, our Indigenous communities that are bearing the brunt of the devastating effect. And now more than ever, we need bold and courageous leadership who's going to have that public health training that's going to make sure that families is at the core of the recovery, right? I have said this on the campaign trail with friends and family and community members that, pre-COVID, we knew inequities existed, but post-COVID, right, while COVID doesn't discriminate, we know that the system that we have now does. And the disparities that we had before has now widened. And so every policy decision, every investment must protect, must provide, and must support our residents and our neighborhoods. That's a priority for me. I think when we talk about lasting recovery, that also means that we have to have equitable investment. And I would, echo Councilwoman-elect Katie Valenzuela regarding the people's budget. I think for too long, we have seen communities left behind. And now more than ever, when we think about having a responsive government, we got to make sure that we uplift those communities that have been left behind, because when we're able to do that, everyone else will rise. And so for me, my priority is making sure that we have a strong public health response, even at a city level, and making sure that when we talk about investment and opportunities, that our funding is equitable and that our budget reflects our values.
Thank you for those answers. I want to hone in and pick up on something that you both said and just do a quick follow-up. You both mentioned equitable investment. Actually, for us here at 80 West Sacramento, public investment is one of our 8 priorities. Recently we've had a lot of controversy and a lot of attention around money that went to the county of Sacramento that was largely allocated to law enforcement, quote unquote, public safety. But we've had also here at the city of Sacramento level, large amounts of our general fund allocated to what we call public safety. I think at some estimates, even by the city's budget office itself, some 3 out of every 4 general fund dollars was allocated towards something called public safety. So one, just to follow up, and I'll go back to Katie on this one, and then come back to you, Mai. One, for the record, what is your position on the funds that were sent to the county that went largely to public safety? What was your position on that? And then 2, can you give me an example of some part of the city's budget, if any, that you would work to reallocate toward some other type of program?
Those are great questions. And it was appalling that so much of the money that was supposed to go to COVID relief that could have gone to contact tracing, to housing assistance, if folks are living in multiple member households, if they got exposed so that they could be safely quarantined, all of those things that we desperately need to get this pandemic under control and to alleviate the disproportionate burden that we're seeing on Latino and Black and Indigenous communities in Sacramento, go to the sheriff, go to someone who has no meaningful role in protecting us, and if anything is harming communities. People's Budget Sacramento organized quickly and was very vocal in fighting back against that. We fought for the new budget that was adopted in September to reduce general fund to the sheriff to compensate for that increase in funding that he got from the CARES money, and unfortunately weren't successful in that. And I think the same went for the city. We were well into the pandemic when we knew that the city police department was going to get more funding than they ever have before, and that the police officers were still going to get a 3% pay increase, despite the fact that we're in an economic crisis, and the union contract clearly allows for that to be revisited. So I think I am a big proponent of the defund movement of police. I know that that makes a lot of folks really anxious because they don't know what that means for public safety. And what I mean is investing in the true public safety, the things like the youth programming, the jobs, the business entrepreneurship support, the things that we should be doing to really make communities safe that don't involve sending someone out with a gun or putting someone behind bars. And that's something that I'm going to be pushing really aggressively on city council. I was really frustrated that the city didn't do more to try to move some money from police, especially in this crisis, to things that would have helped alleviate community burdens. So that's something that is, I'm a big, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there and let Mike take the rest.
No, thank you for that. My same question. One, what was your position on that large amount of county funding? Did you support or not to public safety? And then two, what, if anything, specifically at the city level, what funds would you work to reallocate, or an example of where you would draw from funds to allocate to reallocate to something that you think is more worthwhile, more useful?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question, Chris. I think for me, when I make a policy decision, I really look at it from a public health perspective, especially someone with a background in public health. When we think about public safety, I think oftentimes we think about, being at the moment of crisis, right? How do we ensure that we create the kind of conditions where we don't get to the point of violence? And a big part of that is because we are not looking at the way we're budgeting. And I talk about it in terms of reallocation of resources, right? When you close your eyes and you envision the type of Sacramento you want, that means, activated parks. That means resources for our elders, for our seniors. But that also means that we only have a set amount of budget. And so that budget got to reflect our values. And so I will share, as a school board member, I have been in that seat where I have been a lone vote, where I have made tough decisions before, for 4 years, I've served on the school board. It wasn't very popular to redirect dollars from SRO to making sure SRO is student resource officers, to make sure that we invest those dollars into preventative services, more counselors, more mental health psychology. I think it's really important that we look at the way we use our dollars. And so, I was a 1 to 2 to 3, and then we were able to get the vote we needed on school board to end the contract with SAC PD and redirect those dollars to critical resources that our students desperately need. And that is what I plan to do when I get to City Hall. I have a track record of being vocal about that. I do think, we definitely need to look at the way we budget. While I am a millennial and being innovative, I'm also about, back to basic. What are the core city services that we're supposed to provide? That is, programming for our youth, clean parks, 311. I live in the neighborhood, and when I see illegal dumping, I take photos of it on the app of 311, and then hoping that, they'll pick it up. There's a backlog, right? These are critical services that we have to invest in. But that also means looking at the way we budget other departments. And if that means taking more preventative measures, then absolutely, that means taking dollars. If that means taking dollars from the police department to invest in our neighborhoods to make sure that we can have core basic services be at par, then absolutely.
Thank you for that. Great response. The idea here is, so, and as we I want to move on to some other subject matter here, but I think if you look at the city's budget forecast, 2 and 4 years out, I think even with the additional Measure U funds, which I have a question on later, and then also, but as we've run into the COVID-19 crisis, we are looking at budget forecasts 2 and 4 years out where there are likely coming budget deficits, right? And so this question of where and how willing our elected officials are to make cuts, make changes, make reallocations is going to be super important. I want to move on though, and talk specifically about something that we as ADOS as a movement are very much focused on. In addition to political education, it's also political accountability, or what we call political accountability, and we express that through something we call the Black Agenda, and holding politicians accountable for having a specific Black agenda. So I'm going to come back to you, Mai, and then go to you, Katie, and just ask the overarching question. One, do you have an agenda specifically that addresses the needs and concerns of Black Americans here in our area? If so, can you talk a little bit about what it is? And if you don't, why not? And are you willing to engage in a specific agenda and create a specific agenda for addressing the needs of Black Americans here in our area, particularly Black Americans who descend from U.S. slavery? And I'll go to Maya on that one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. So thank you so much for your question. When we launched our campaign, I think one of the core things that I've discussed about is that we have neighborhoods like Meadowview, Detroit, and Valley High that have the highest concentration of poverty in our district. And when you look at those neighborhoods are mainly Black, Southeast Asian communities. And so, my priority is to make sure that how do we actually get our families out of poverty? I am not obviously Black, but I lean in heavily on, organizers, advocates on the ground to actually help co-create a vision together. My thing is, like I was sharing, if we can uplift the communities that have been left behind, we are able to uplift everyone. In terms of the Black agenda, I have to lean in on community partners to help co-create that, because I don't live the experiences of Black folks. And it's important for me that if I make a decision that's going to impact Black folks, they're the one leading the fight on the ground. And as an advocate, as an elected, that I am pushing their agenda at City Hall. And so that is what I plan to do. While I do represent an incredibly diverse community, I am also cognizant of the disparities in different racial groups. In particular, I will also share, just as a Hmong American woman, as an API, given the racial uprising, I also feel like it's a responsibility of someone who is not Black to step up and to show up. I have had really tough, courageous conversations in my own community about anti-Blackness in our communities, right? When the George Floyd murder happened, I think many of you know there was an Asian officer that stood by that was Tu Tao, and he was actually Hmong. And after that incident, women advocates and we joined a webinar to talk about the incident, the murder of George Floyd, and to talk about Black Lives Matter. And what does that mean for Hmong folks, for Asian Americans to be in the part of the movement to basically fight for Black lives, right? And that actually means having those courageous conversations with our families, our friends, our uncles, even myself. I think folks are not immune to being racist because we have been conditioned. And so for me, as a community organizer, as an elected, as a public advocate, I think it's important for me to also check my own biases and figure out the ways that we all have been complicit in upholding a system that has been harmful for Black lives. That's a courageous conversation that I'm having within my own community, because I think before we can even talk about policy, it's also about changing hearts and minds and having those courageous conversations so that our families can understand what it means when we talk about Black Lives Matter.
Thank you for that, Mai. Katie, same question to you. One, do you have an agenda specifically that addresses the needs specifically of Black American descendants of U.S. slavery? If so, can you talk a little bit about what it is? If not, why not? And are you willing to work to create such a specific agenda?
Absolutely. This is a great question. And I think, my and I worked with two of our colleagues to create a pledge on law enforcement money, specifically calling out the roots of law enforcement and slavery enforcement, and really calling to task our fellow electeds to stand up for Black lives and to not take donations from those groups. And we've taken a lot of hits for that. Even very recently, we had a couple of elected officials say that they don't believe the history of law enforcement rooted in slavery and asked for their names to get taken off the pledge, which was really disappointing, because if we can't even acknowledge like what's going on in our community and where it comes from, then how are we going to really confront the solutions that we need to do? So that's probably the closest to it. I wish I had a better Black agenda that was explicitly for Black folks. I would love to work with you all on that. My agenda is much more like racial justice focused more broadly, obviously, as someone who's Latina and Indigenous, and then someone who really cares about correcting those issues, looking at where we're spending money. I talk a lot about metrics and accountability and collecting data. We don't collect good data on who benefits from our investments, who's getting contracts, who's getting employment. We have a lot of issues in even understanding really how deep the disparity goes within our own city government, so that we can confront it really intentionally and ensure we're being thoughtful about that. But I would love to work with anybody who wants to on an explicit Black agenda. I think that's very needed in Sacramento.
Right on, right on. All right, let's go to another question that keys in on one of the major parts of the ADOS Sacramento and ADOS National Black Agenda, which is reparations. Recently, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed AB 3121, which is a bill that creates a 9-member task force to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, with a particular focus on African Americans who descend from U.S. slavery. ADOS Sacramento and ADOS California and the ADOS movement nationwide were very, very instrumental in making sure that that bill was in good shape and then passed, and then also signed by the governor of California. Nationwide, there's been a movement recently that has pushed and advanced the cause for reparations further than I think many of us have seen in our lifetimes. That movement is directly due to the work of ADOS organizers and activists on the ground and online. So very, very straightforward question to both of you. I'll go back to Katie on this one and then jump to you. Do you support reparations for American descendants of slavery?
Absolutely. I don't know if you want more than but yes.
Okay. Perfect. Mai.
Yeah, I was going to say yes, too. But I think for me, reparation is more, I think it's so great to just shout out to ADOS for doing that incredible advocacy and groundwork, right? Y'all are on the front lines doing this work. I think for me, what it also means is really just to make the record clear, because we know a lot of folks in this country, in this city, in this state, it's not clear to them in terms of the history of Black America, right? And I think Black folks have been carved out of a New Deal. When you think about during the Depression, right? You had the greatest middle class built after World War II with the GI Bill. And a lot of Black folks were actually cut out of that, right? And so what does it mean for the conditions that we see now for Black families? And so for me, I'm absolutely in support of reparation. But I will also say, this work takes organizing, right? And so just shout out to all of y'all that have been doing the hard work. And I think while, as a councilwoman, we do just push things locally. I think that we also are in the backyard, right? We're here in Sacramento as a city council. We could be passing resolution, also going to the Capitol with ADOS to speak on behalf as well. And that is what I intend to do, Chris. And I really look forward to working closely with your organization.
Perfect. And actually, Kim and I are going to meet tomorrow. We are working on some draft resolution that we're going to pitch to our ADOS Sacramento team, and then get some community feedback on it, and then push it forward. But great, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Let me push forward if I can. to talk specifically about one of the key areas of focus of the ADOS movement, which is the racial, or in our case, what we call the lineage wealth gap or wealth gulf, right? It's the difference between the asset and wealth position of Black Americans who descend from slavery and non-Black Americans. We don't have really good data right now on the wealth gap with respect to Sacramentans, Black Sacramentans' wealth. One of the things that we are working on and that we are focused on is improving the way that we collect data, specifically on wealth and specifically on our own ethnic and lineage group, which is Black American descendants of U.S. slavery, or American descendants of slavery, which is another way we say that. I have the shirt on. So I want to talk specifically about the wealth gap. Again, we don't have great data on this, particularly here in Sacramento. We know that nationwide, the median Black family, typical Black family, is was worth some $1,700 liquid before COVID, right? So we can expect that to have decreased. Nationwide, half of Black America, if you add up all their wealth, half of Black America is worth less than $1 combined. 80% of America is worth near $1 combined. We within the ADOS movement are very much focused on the fact that that gap and that gulf began right after Reconstruction, began right after the end of chattel slavery, and has persisted and consisted since then. And you talked about some of the ways in which that gap was federally enforced and nationally enforced through whether it be what we call the Jim Crow GI Bill or the Jim Crow New Deal, right? But there's a lot that has contributed to it. But what we do have are some basic numbers on asset poverty here in the city and county of Sacramento due to the work of Prosperity Now. The Prosperity Now scorecard tells us that almost half of Black Americans in Sacramento live in something called asset poverty. And that same scorecard also tells us that some 30% of Black Americans here already have a zero net worth. So, in your opinion, what is it going to take to close the Black-white wealth gap here in our area, and what can you do as a councilwoman to help close that gap? And I want to go to Katie first on this question.
I thank you for asking this question. I think the data is a huge issue. As someone who's an Indigenous woman, and we're largely even left off the chart entirely, it's really frustrating that you can't really confront the challenge until you really know what's going on, but we kind of know what's going on. And we were organizing in Oak Park when gentrification was really hitting its height in that neighborhood, creating the land trust, trying to get ahead of it. It moved too quickly for us, unfortunately, to really get a handle on it. And we can't really talk about investment without talking about gentrification and displacement. And that's not just with housing, right? That's also a cultural displacement. I mean, a lot of businesses that left Oak Park really quickly that had served the community for a really long time. It was really terrible to witness, and something that is a foreboding tale for what we can expect in other parts of the city, especially as we fight for the investment that we know is needed to really confront this. Not just the access to capital, confronting banking. When Bank of America closed on the corner of MLK and Broadway in Oak Park, they had initiated one home loan in that entire zip code the entire time they had been there. And that should be a crime. There should not be allowed to have a bank in a neighborhood that isn't actually investing or making capital more accessible to folks in that neighborhood so they can start businesses, so they can buy homes. And so the city can really do a lot to help confront that. I'm a huge proponent of public banking for this reason, because I think we need to just move the capital into our own hands and really be investing, not with profit necessarily in mind, but with equity in mind, with community benefits in mind, so that we can really make sure that capital is accessible to folks, which can help remove barriers to building. that wealth gap, but we also have to talk about how do we protect communities, specifically historically Black communities, from this capitalism when it goes wild, and thinking about land trusts, thinking about how do we help people buy their buildings, buy their homes so that they're less vulnerable, but also how do we as a city put in place policies to ensure that all this investment that might be coming in from the city actually benefits the folks who've been living there and not the new folks who move in from the Bay or from the Central City or wherever and displace the folks that we were trying to help in the first place. So I could go on and on again, but I think that the asset gap, I mean, we're all fighting the same thing. We're all fighting white supremacy in one form or another. And I think this is something that I think across the board, when we look at communities of color in Sacramento, that we all say, I hear the same thing from the Native American community, the same thing from the Latino community. Like, where is the equity for us? When are we going to get our shot to build that capital and to try to confront this challenge? And I think we have a lot we can do in Sacramento.
My same question to you. I presented some of the data. In your opinion, what's it going to take to close this gap, and what can you do as a councilwoman to help?
Yeah, no, Chris, thank you so much for your question. I really appreciate it. I think Katie definitely touched on a lot of like a multi-tier kind of solution. I will say, in District 8 in particular, we know poverty is widespread. I mean, when you look at the data just for District 8, and I do echo on the data piece, because I think that we need to be able to disaggregate that data to actually look at Black folks in the district in terms of how much they're making, is that, 35% of folks in District 8 make less than $35,000 a year. And so that already paints a picture that you see. And I know that when companies, when they come into the district or they come into the city, what they do is they draw a circle around neighborhoods and they look at the disposable income of families. And I think for me, as when I get elected as councilwoman, is the poverty issue. How do we uplift our families from poverty, right? How do we ensure that we get more disposable income in their pockets so they could be spending in our neighborhoods? That is absolutely a priority for me. But that also means that our families, our communities need really good jobs, not just fast food jobs, jobs that allow for career advancement opportunities. That is absolutely really important. And then also for entrepreneurs, for Black, Brown, Indigenous entrepreneurs, right? That requires capital. And so it's so important as a city, right, that we set aside economic grants to be distributed to Black and minority-owned businesses. So, when I think about the wealth gap, it comes down to the poverty piece and how do you move family from poverty, and how do you do that work? And Cassandra can speak to this, the work that she does, right, at her organization, and she's been doing this for years, uplifting families so that they can sustain themselves. But a big part of that is making sure that we can increase their income. That is really, really important to me. And so that means financial literacy. That means making sure we set aside economic grants. That means making sure that we have incentive programs, right, for our minority-owned businesses, so that they're not left behind.
Thank you for that. And also Katie, the racial wealth gap is a very, very specific, very important focus for us. And so, excuse me, you can expect follow-up on that. But thank you for those answers. I want to transition really quickly. I have one or two more questions specifically about the citywide stuff, and then we're going to back out and start to talk specifically about measures A and C. And I want to bring in the amazing Cassandra Jennings into that discussion as well. But before we go there, I want to touch on employment and also procurement, specifically public employment, public procurement. We've heard and we've seen a lot of the development and the construction and the building that's going on here in Sacramento, and a very common question we get is, why don't we see no Black people out there doing the construction jobs, right? Why don't we see as many Black people as we think we should out there, getting the construction and building contracts, right? This is a very, very common question that we get. We've had this question ourselves too. And so the question for you both, and I'll start with Mai on this, I'll go back to you, is, one, how are you going to ensure that city procurement contracts go to Black-owned businesses? And also, how are you going to ensure that the public employment opportunities that surround some of those contracts go to Black people here in the city?
Yeah. So, Chris, that's a really good question. I think one is definitely making sure that as a city that we set aside a certain percentage for minority contracts, right? I think just straight up, like we can have a policy in place. The other piece I would also say is that looking at our apprenticeship programs, right? We got to do a better job at building that pipeline because these are amazing, great, solid jobs. And we got to make sure that we also recruit, folks into the trades. That's really important. I think, even when I, as a school board member, I think many of our, even my own parents, and uncles, I think what they see, obviously I'm a big proponent of higher education, but I think the trades are also, you can get good quality jobs, and we got to also demystify basically that type of work as well. Good, solid jobs. And we got to make sure that we actually build that pipeline and build our apprenticeship programs and recruit. I think that's a critical point. But I will also say, I think from a policy level, making sure that we set aside a certain amount to make sure that when these contracts come in, that we are making it a priority.
Thank you for that, Katie. How do we get grants? Excuse me. How do we get contracts and employment to Black folks that come from the city? How do we do that? How would you work to do that as a councilwoman?
Absolutely. And this, for me, it goes beyond project labor agreements. It goes to community benefits agreements. And so community benefits agreements on projects, which should be standard for any project that gets public money, can help us target pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs in the Black communities so that we can really ensure that the pipeline is there. Because that's what it takes is apprenticeship programs, and the unions do a great job of running programs to train folks. A lot of folks need that pre-apprenticeship program level, which can help, address any maybe educational gaps that are going on, help support with things like childcare or things that you might need in order to really be able to compete for those apprenticeship jobs and eventually those union jobs. So I think working with the unions to expand the availability of pre-apprenticeship programs in Black communities and institutionalizing community benefits agreements, so we ensure that we're targeting every public dollar we make is targeting to the degree possible the Black community and other communities who might need it.
Thank you for that. So we have a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. We also have more questions here for you both. But in the interest of time, let's talk specifically about the two of the most and the two most controversial attention-getting ballot measures on the ballot here citywide in the city of Sacramento. They are measures A and C. We'll focus specifically on measures A and C. Measure A, the Sacramento Mayoral Accountability and Community Equity Act of 2020, and Measure C, the Sacramento Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Charter Amendment. Just as you can see on the screen, ADOS Sacramento is recommending a no vote on Measure A and a yes vote on Measure C. So I want to put this question on first Measure A to both candidates, but I do want to bring in Cassandra Jennings here, president of the Greater Sacramento Urban League. Also to talk specifically about measures A and C. Cassandra, I want to go to you first. One, what is your position on Measure A? What is the position of the Urban League on Measure A, if it can take a position, right? What is the position on Measure A? Why or why not? And if you could, before you answer about what your position is, what is your understanding of what Measure A would do?
Okay. Thank you. And Chris, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. You have been killing me all the time, because in a good way, because all of the questions that you've been asking and Katie have been engaging in is what we do every day. And so I appreciate the the interest and the leadership that you guys are taking on those issues, and just was chomping at the bit to get in that discussion. So I know that wasn't why you invited me, and I know I'm not running for an elected office, but in the community, we are certainly engaged in it. We are engaged in Build Black. We know that home ownership for African Americans is plummeted in Sacramento County, which is a part of the wealth building, the reparation we are engaged in. And all of this is around in Proposition 16. It must pass if we're going to be able to have this conversation about race, and if we're going to give the tools to the city council for them to even measure that. And we spent 24 years backpedaling and putting aside the conversation, and that's why we're way behind, but that's my opinion. Let me just tell you that I have been here 30 years. I have worked in every neighborhood that has been underserved and needed as far as the redevelopment agency to lift them up, to bring them tools. I had the opportunity to be in the city manager's office for 6 years as assistant city manager, and then worked for mayor in the mayor's office under Mayor Kevin Johnson. And I will tell you that I support Measure A for all the reasons. So for on two fronts. The first one is the mayor accountability, is that it's time that we hold the elected official that we have elected citywide as the and give him or her or they the tools that they need in order to be successful. Right now, the authority is not new authority. It's authority that's in a non-elected city manager, which has a huge task and authority, but we didn't elect that person in that position. So we can't hold them accountable in the same way that we can hold an elected official. The budget, which we heard a lot about, is important. We needed to be visionary. We needed to come from a point of the community. We needed to be an inclusive economic development. And we work through our elected officials to make sure that that happens. We, the people of the city. On the other end, and I know the community has a lot to say about it, but I applaud the efforts of taking good policy from the community, from the ground up, and put it in the charter, because it ingrains it in a system that will allow it not to be at the whim of what's going on or the professionals to decide what's best, including the city council. It holds them accountable. It it locks in $40 million as a starting place to go in inclusive economic development. It does include participatory budgeting. It looks at some of the ways that we really need to hold the whole system accountable. And one way to do it is to put it in our charter. So I'm voting yes on Measure A. The Urban League is supporting it, because if we expect change, we need to change the structure that we expect to deliver it and hold everybody accountable for the results.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation, and also for explaining the position of the Urban League on Measure A, the Sacramento accountability measure. I want to go to let's go to Katie on this, because Katie, you work closely with the No on A campaign. Can you just tell us what your understanding of what Measure A would do, and then talk about why your position is no on Measure A?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks for being here, Cassandra. I don't, disagree with a lot of what you were saying. We need change. We need more inclusion. We need more equity. A lot of these ideas that are in there is stuff that I campaigned on, stuff that we championed. But unfortunately, the way it's written won't make those promises real. And that's what's so important. I think if you hear nothing else I say, is that we can't keep falling for more false promises. The 40 million is a great example. It talks about carving out money for inclusive economic development and for youth. Doesn't really define what that means. The money for youth could go to more policing for youth. The money for inclusive economic development could go to more building downtown. And until we define that, we can't really know what that will mean. Participatory budgeting, ethics commission, racial impact assessments, all these great concepts that could have been done in a really specific way to ensure the promises would be real, were not done in that way, despite many of us asking for changes to the language in the ordinance. But what's most important here is that we should not be forced to barter for more power for the mayor in order to get the things that neighborhoods need. ADOS and you deserve this investment without having to give the mayor more power. And this is more than just him being in charge of the administrative functions. I have to say, if that was all it was, I would be less concerned. This is also him having the ability to veto city council decisions, meaning even if we get 5 folks to agree, he could veto those things. He's also going to have line item veto authority over the budget. The mayor has said directly, not only did he agree with the budgets that were happening and think they were great, including the increases in police funding, he has said repeatedly at community meetings that he does not support defunding the police. So we are not getting the revolutionary change that we should be getting. And voting no on Measure A doesn't mean that you say the current system's working great. It's not. We all know that it's not. What we're saying is that what this is promising us isn't what we need. And so that's why I'm excited to be leading the No on A campaign in Sacramento.
All right, Mai, I want to come to you. Get your position. One, what is your understanding of what Measure A would do, and then what's your position? And then I want to circle back to Cassandra to give you an opportunity to respond to anything you've heard from either Katie or Mai. But Mai, what's your understanding and what's your position?
Absolutely. I will keep this short because it's 11:57 and Katie's actually leading the fight on the Measure A. I am also a no on A, and I'll keep it really simple because as a resident, as someone born in South Sacramento, as a community organizer, I truly believe that centralized power to one person is never good for our communities. Just straight up, right? And not only that, but, if we move to a strong mayor, it's going to be really problematic. Right now, the way we have governance is that we can change the makeup of our city council every 2 years because the odd and even numbers are up every 2 years. So you have the opportunity to organize and get electeds out of office or in office that will fight for you. With this, you're going to have centralized power to a mayor, and you are stuck with that person for 4 years, right? Not only that, but for decades, we've seen wealthier neighborhoods and residents, oftentimes those precincts, they're the one that decides, a mayor race. And so what that means is that the mayor can just play to that base, right? And that is not good for our communities at all. I believe in more representation, democracy, not less.
Okay, thank you for that. Cassandra, do you want to respond to anything you heard with respect to the no on A position, or are there other benefits to Measure A that you think people should know about so that they can have that as a part of their decision making with respect to Measure A?
Well, I would say that this really widens the representation. It does not narrow it. I think we already elect a mayor, citywide mayor, that we expect of him right now, him or her. And I'd like for us to take the person out of it and let's just talk about the position. And that position needs to have the tools that it needs to deliver on the promises. I think that the promises will be delivered in this format because there is a fundamental and a set that is not enshrined in the charter that is not now. And just like we would hold the mayor accountable, we, the community, would hold the council members to make sure that things are done. I think there are checks and balances. There are checks and balances that in any government, we don't want to give anybody any power, including any city council person or mayor, that we can't hold them accountable for. If we want change, and if we want to move it forward, or then Measure A is the way we go.
Okay, all right. We'll leave it there for now. There's definitely going to be more conversation on Measure A. We will be talking more about that. Also, Cassandra, you brought up Prop 16. I think some of the other folks here brought up Prop 16 also. We are, as a group, ADOS Sacramento and ADOS California, recommending a yes on Prop 16, by the way. So if you have your ballot, vote yes on Prop 16. Lastly, I want to introduce Measure C, right, which is focused on rents, right, and it's focused on what's called the Sacramento Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Charter Amendment. Sacramento ADOS Sacramento is recommending a yes vote on Measure C. I want to go to Mai on this one, and then I'll come back to Katie, and then go to Cassandra. Finally, one, what is your understanding of what Measure C would do, and what is your position?
Thanks, Chris. And I'll keep this short because I also know Katie's leading this. As a candidate right now, I think it's easy for me just to be quiet and not get involved with this campaign. But I have been vocal. I've been a vocal supporter of rent control, and absolutely yes on C. I mean, we've seen from 2012 to 2019 that we've had about a 45% increase in rent. You can talk about investment in our communities, but if our families can't stay in their home and they get displaced, then that is an injustice to our families in our community. And that's the reason why I'm a yes on C. I will also say, as a candidate, when I've taken this position, we've seen independent expenditure. I get email notification about the realtors. They've dropped about 20,000 in the District 8 raise against me because I've taken this position. Folks have said I shouldn't be vocal about it, but whether I win the seat or not, as a community advocate, I have to stand stern on my values, and I am yes on rent control. Our families cannot afford to be displaced. We've seen this. Families are living paycheck to paycheck, cannot afford rent, and we have to do more to protect tenants. And that's why I'm a yes on C.
Okay, thank you for that position. Katie, I'm going to come to you, and then Cassandra right after. Position on Measure C and what's your understanding of what it would do?
Absolutely. Measure C would cut the rate that your rent could go up in half. Currently, under the city ordinance, your rent could go up as much as 10%, which is, I don't know about you all, I work for nonprofits. My income does not go up 10% every year, so I can't afford that. And so it cuts the rate in half. It establishes eviction protections on day one. Right now, under the city ordinance, you have to wait a year of tenancy before you get any protections. And this Measure C also includes relocation assistance if you have to move, which is huge for last month's rent, for moving expenses, etc. But the most important thing that this does is it creates an elected renters board, a board that is purely dedicated only to implementing this law. It's going to provide an important space for us to arbitrate disputes, to help alleviate concerns if a landlord's about to lose a property because they need to raise the cost. This is a place where we can actually solve those problems. And we are never going to get ahead of our housing crisis if folks who are in housing now can't afford to keep that housing. And so I've been really frustrated with the city's opposition to this, because the fact that we're not building more units, the fact that we're not doing more to get the homeless off the street, that's squarely in their bucket. That's their responsibility. That's their mistakes so far. Well, all we're trying to do is protect renters in their housing now so that we can try to get a handle on those bigger questions. And the big critique has been, well, this doesn't solve building. This doesn't solve this. I'm like, well, we're not trying to solve that. We're just trying to protect tenants who are living in housing right now so that we even have a shot at correcting the longer term, bigger challenges. So I campaigned on this. This was a big part of the reason why I decided to run. We need more protection, not less, especially now.
Cassandra Jennings, President of Greater Sacramento Urban League. What is your understanding of what Measure C would do, and what is your position and the position of the Urban League on Measure C?
Our position is no on Measure C. And I can't believe that we're talking about protecting tenants when the city of Sacramento has passed the most aggressive tenant protections in the history of the city. And the state now has the laws in place that are the most leading in the whole country. So we are already there. I know that this is like old news. This is like leftovers from the ballot previously, but I think the city has worked really hard and brought all the stakeholders to really come up with a plan that works, that protect the tenants. So let's give them a chance. And one of the issues, you're right, this measure, if we really want to talk about what the issue is, about a supply. It's about the housing crisis. It's also about supply as well as the renters. And this doesn't address that at all. And I'll say that what really should be concerning, especially to those that are elected by city council, when you're talking about isolating power, is that it's proposing that an independent group be set aside. All that's creating a whole nother form of government, which now is in court litigation as to whether it's either legal or not, but it without any kind of checks and balances. And then it's going to cost us a lot of money to then go back and do that election. And then there's no parameters around how much they can spend, how much they can take the money from, and what they can do. We have rent control right now. Let's give it a chance to work. It does protect the tenants. It does look at the issues that are prevalent. And then what we all need to be focused on is how we can increase the supply so that we have enough affordable housing and decent housing so that people can enjoy our great city and our great region.
Thank you for that, Cassandra. But as we wrap up here, before we do, Mai or Kay, do you want to respond to anything that Cassandra just brought up with respect to Measure C?
Yeah, just very simply. Sorry, Mai. Just very simply.
I was just gonna say all you.
So just very simply, ask a tenant. Ask tenants. I'm a tenant. I know that what we have right now isn't good enough. Is the current housing stock working well for you? Can you afford those $2,000 studios that they're building downtown? Because that's a solution that the city's put forward. Either you can afford 10% a year, or you can afford to try to cobble things together and make a little suite with 5 roommates in one of these $2,000 bedroom units, and then you can afford housing. And it's frustrating because like nobody is saying we don't need to build more housing, but we're never going to get ahead of this if we can't protect where tenants are at now. And if you think this is good enough, then you're clearly not a renter, because every renter I talk to understands the minute I say lowers the cap on rent increases, they say yes, because they know they can't afford the current rent increases allowed under both the city and the state law. Also, yes on Prop 21. So I got to throw that pitch in too.
So we serve community renters every day. We work with people who have challenges and needs. I am here to say that it goes beyond protecting the tenants. It's affordable housing. It's the availability of housing. It's building up neighborhoods. It's really helping those that are most in need. And the rent control that we currently have and between the state and the local will address those needs. And we do need to focus on the supply.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Mai. We are into the noon hour here. We had planned on getting some questions and comments from the audience. Kim, Moya, I know we've had a bunch of questions come in. But I do want to respect the time of the guests. So if we could, why don't we gather the questions as much as we can and try to get them to Katie, to Mai, to Cassandra as a follow-up. And if we could, and I think this would be great for the guests here. Hopefully, you would be willing to come back and have a second round of this conversation. Really, really great discussion. We had a bunch of questions that we couldn't get to also, but we do want to respect your time. Thank you for joining us here for what is our first ADOS Sacramento Forum, focused specifically on local issues, local candidates, local ballot measures, measures A and C. Also, I want to give a big shout out to the Greater Sacramento Urban League. Thank you, Cassandra. Also want to give a shout out to the Greater Sacramento Urban League Young Professionals. I know some folks over there too, so I want to shout them out. Katie, best of luck. My best of luck as well. This will conclude our show today. And again, like, share, comment, subscribe, tell a friend, or tell another friend. Get active, get engaged. Also connect with ADOS Sacramento. ADOSSacramento@gmail.com is the email address. Email us, get on our email list, get all of our updates. We'll be out in the community next week for sure as well, down at the African Marketplace, Floor and Roll. We'll have an info booth out there. We'll be talking local politics as well. We'll be all around Sacramento. Thank you, fam. Appreciate you. Have a great day. Talk soon.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Chris.